Did you know that members of the American Homebrewers Association get exclusive deals and discounts at more than 1,800 breweries, brew pubs, and homebrew shops around the country? It's true. And if you like saving money on beery pursuits, you should definitely join the AHA. Memberships start at just $38, and you'll receive 6 issues of Zymergy magazine each year. Learn more and join at homebrewersassociation.org. That's homebrewersassociation.org. Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, April 19th, 2018. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Homebrewer Joe Covey shares a couple of split batch experiments with Steve Wilkes and me from his JoCo Homebrew Club. This round, Joe compares the effects of 2 different yeasts on a brown ale and lets us sample a Gose plain and with fruit added. Delicious. If you go to basicbrewing.com, you can find archives of our audio and video shows, our DVDs, our brewer's logbooks, and other Basic Brewing gear. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Basic Brewing and find our show page on Facebook. We have a cool Basic Brewing app on iTunes and Amazon.com, and we're found all over the place where fine podcasts are served up. And if you do us the favor of rating us on iTunes and maybe leaving a nice comment, they say that'll help new listeners to find us. If you want to support us financially, check out patreon.com/basicbrewing. Steve and I were finally able to get together last night and shoot some Basic Brewing video episodes. We sampled my no-boil hoppy pale ale, my Instant Pot rice pilsner, and my 30-minute rye juicy pale ale. And then we sat down and recorded an audio episode with 4 of Steve's meads that he's been working on. Man, he is knocking those meads out of the park. Very impressive. I'm trying to get the first episode, the video episode, knocked out in a hurry so I can at least do a few days of early release for those subscribers who qualify, and I greatly appreciate your support. I have to give a shout-out to homebrewer Beth from Brooklyn, who sent me a couple bottles of a beer based on my fruitcake barley wine recipe from a few years back. Beth's was a 2-gallon batch that she brewed back in 2015. She says she modified my spicing a bit. Beth used 1.25 teaspoons cinnamon, and again, this is for a 2-gallon batch. 1.25 teaspoons cinnamon, 1 teaspoon ground ginger, 1.25 teaspoon ground nutmeg, and 1/4 teaspoon ground cloves. Beth says the oddest thing about this batch is that after priming, it would not carbonate. I waited over a year and even tried agitating the bottles to get it to carbonate. I had used USO5 for fermentation, but my ABV worked out to 11.7%, so it may have been too much for the yeast. As a last-ditch effort, Beth says, I opened each bottle and added about 2 grains of CBC1 yeast. For those who don't know, like me, until I recently found out, that's a cask and bottle conditioning dry yeast. Beth says, lo and behold, it finally carbonated, and I think it turned out great. Well, Beth, I have to agree. Steve, Joe, and I sampled a bottle after we recorded today's interview, and it was very tasty. I was especially taken with the aroma, which to me smelled exactly like a fresh, home-cooked fruitcake. I don't remember mine smelling that good. There was the spice in the aroma, and also it smelled like cake. It was a cakey aroma from the malt and the molasses and probably the brown sugar as well. It's very nice. Thanks again to Beth for sending that along. Here's something else from the mailbag, the email bag. Craig from Charlotte, North Carolina writes, after watching your recent 30-minute New England IPA video, I thought I'd share the results of a New England IPA I brewed a few weeks back. The results were a bit surprising, but maybe just to my simple mind. Craig says the beer was requested by a friend with celiac disease. She is able to enjoy beers that have been treated with Clarity Firm, so that was my plan. My one concern, besides giving beer to someone with celiac disease, was that the Clarity Firm would diminish or remove the desired haze in my New England IPA. Craig says, here's part of the product description. Clarity Firm prevents chill haze by breaking down the proteins involved, thus preventing protein/polyphenol complexes from forming. Craig says, thinking that the haze I was looking for was about to get chewed up by the Clarity firm, I thought maybe I'd end up with a low bitterness, very juicy IPA rather than a cloudy New England IPA. He says the recipe consisted of 2-row flaked corn, bread flour, Mosaic and Simcoe hops, and yeast London Ale 3. Just as suggested, I added the entire vial of Clarity Firm to the wort at the time of pitching the yeast. Craig says, I'm happy to report the beer was delicious and cloudy, as desired, even with the Clarity Firm. Oh, and safe for my friend. So Clarity Firm apparently did its job of breaking down the gluten proteins, but still left plenty of haze. What do you think? Well, I didn't know what to think. So I sent Craig's letter to Mike Tonsmeyer, who has brewed a lot of juicy, hazy, delicious beers. And Mike said, interesting, another data point in the what is the New England IPA haze debate. So science. Craig doing some science with New England IPAs. Let's talk about another delicious hoppy beer, but not necessarily one of the hazy kind. Desiree's Super Fabulous Tropical Citrus IPA from our friends and sponsors Desiree and Dave of High Gravity in Tulsa. You know, I spent a lot of time talking about the great electric brewing systems from High Gravity, but they also, are a full-service homebrew shop and have fun and delicious ingredient kits, too, like Desiree's Super Fabulous Tropical Citrus IPA. According to the website, highgravitybrew.com, the description therein, this beer ingredient kit is a Desiree original. She loves the aroma and flavor of the citrusy hops, so she decided to make her own after having it on tap at their tap room. And several customers asking for the recipe, they decided it needed to be a kit. The beer is brewed using nothing but late addition hops. By adding all the hops in the last 15 minutes of the boil, the bitterness is smooth and not harsh. The in-your-face aromas of pineapple and grapefruit puts an instant smile on your face. And it's all backed up in the flavor as well. The solid malt backbone completes the flavor profile for a quaffable, intensely flavored IPA that isn't too crazy on the alcohol level. That sounds like a perfect summer beer. And the great thing about kits from High Gravity is you can choose options to customize ingredient kits to your preferences. For example, choosing extract or all grain and having your grains crushed or left whole. High Gravity has a bunch of recipe kits for all seasons. You can check them out at family-owned and operated highgravitybrew.com. That's highgravitybrew.com. Okay, Homebrewer Joe Covey has been on the program before a couple of times. He's formed a club amongst his friends and colleagues with whom he shares split-batch experiments on a monthly basis. This time, the styles we're sampling are brown ale and Gose. Well, Joe Covey, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thanks so much for having me back.
And here we are, the host of our place where we are, here at stevesbrewshop.com, is Steve Wilkes.
Hi, James. And Joe.
We've been sampling already, so we're ahead of the game. So we did a triangle test where we got two samples that are the same. One of these things is not like the other, and Steve and I have been trying to suss out which is which. So what have we been sampling, Joe?
So this is a brown ale that I brewed for the brew club. This one was a lot of fun. I've done a few brown ales in the past. I think this one turned out pretty nice, though.
I think so, too. I think all three samples were delicious. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, very nice. Just nice and nutty and roasty and, not a stout, not a porter, a brown ale.
And I had coincidentally, I had a Newcastle last night, and I was not impressed. I was at a pizza place, and I like this beer better. Not that they're exactly the same at all, but this one's nice and roasty. Yeah. It's a lot darker than the Newcastle. It's like a black coffee colored, but the roast comes through nicely, and it's all three samples were delicious. So first of all, talk about what your goals were with the experiment.
So the main goal, I really wanted to punch up the roasty factor, and so I used actually a pound of oats Actually, a little over a pound. It was what was ever left over in the container, roughly a pound. But I toasted it at 350 degrees right before going in, and so they finished up. And I figured it just a small amount wouldn't contribute a whole lot to temperature, But I pulled them straight out of the oven and right into the mash tun, and I think that helped a lot with the roasty flavors and aromatics and all of that.
Yeah, well, it apparently worked because the thing that hit my tongue first was roasty, nice and kind of a fresh roasty flavor.
Yeah, and yet not that roastiness that you would expect with, say, black patent malt. So it's not a bitter roastiness. It's kind of, bread-like in a way. Yeah.
So what was the rest of the grain bill like?
So I had, let's take a look at my notes here. So it was mostly Maris Otter. There were 22 pounds of stuff in this brew. I ended up with about 5.5 gallons in each fermenter when it was all said and done. But yeah, 22 pounds of grain, and then the oats as well, the 1 pound of oats. So it was 18 pounds of Maris Otter, a pound of brown malt, 8 ounces of Crystal 60, 8 ounces of red wheat, 8 ounces of special roast, and 8 ounces of chocolate malt.
Oh, wow.
And so I just spiced it up with a little bit of this and that. Again, trying to punch up that roasty factor, and I always add a little bit of wheat to my brews just for head retention, things like that.
So why would this not be a porter?
That's a really good question. That line is so blurry. And, I read quite a bit before I do these brews because I provide these info cards to try and that's part of this whole thing with my friends that I share this beer with is so they can kind of get to know their beer. And so I read quite a bit about brown ales and stouts and porters. And to be honest, I don't really know what makes this not a porter. I think it's I was a little bit restrained on the darker roasted grains because I didn't want a really deep black color, and I think this turned out fairly translucent, not extremely opaque like a porter or a stout might be. But yeah, that's what I guess I called it a brown ale because that's what it turned out looking like.
So I think it's to me it's not a porter because I think it's not sort of with a porter. I think I get more of a richness than this beer. This beer is more like if you were to take maybe, if you were to go from pale ale to amber ale to this is the next step to me.
Yes, I agree. And it's tricky because a lot of times brown ales end up really being porters, or they kind of end up being kind of pale ales that aren't quite. I think it's a tricky style to get accurate.
So I'm curious. I want to ask you guys, doing this for the amount of time that you've done it, is it just a color thing in your mind? I mean, as far as where they draw the line from, say, a brown ale to a porter to a stout. I mean,
I think we'd have to just read the style guideline and see. This may be one of the it's in the eye of the beholder kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think so. But in my mind, a brown ale is lighter. It's not as rich as a porter. It's not as rich as a stout. It's definitely not about hops. It's about malt. I think it gets kind of tricky. And I also think, and I'm stepping out a little bit from what I know for a fact, but I think that, when you talk about a Yorkshire mild and you get into these very subtle regional differences that the people that make them and drink them their whole lives can tell you exactly what's different about it. So, yeah, I think there is. For our purposes, it's pretty much color. That's my opinion. But when I think of a porter, I think of a fairly substantial beer, but not as substantial as a stout.
Yeah, I agree. And we're down to the bottom of our cups here, and it is a translucent beer. I mean, you can see through it. So, I mean, to me, what I'm picturing in my mind as a porter is it would be sort of more cloudy or more opaque. More opaque. Good, yes. Good word, Joe. Thank you very much. So these three samples are not the same. Oh, we didn't talk about hopping.
Oh, right. So that was another sort of twist that I was after here. I read a few recipes that people have done where they add some more American style hops, very very fruity and aromatic, and rather than these old world hops just for bittering purposes. And so I used some Challenger hops, just an ounce, right at the start of the boil, and let that ride through. And then I just wanted to try a late edition hop. And so just a few minutes before the end of the boil, I added 2 ounces of Citra to try and just bring out, just try and just a different, flavor profile on this beer to kind of counter the roastiness. And I'm glad it didn't turn out tasting like a muddled mess. But I think it's quite good. I can taste a little bit of that citrusy flavor, which I think goes nice with the real deep roastiness.
Well, that was another thing that I was going to say separated this beer from a porter in that there is a nice hop bite. It is kind of a darker pale ale in my opinion, but it's obviously not a Cascadian dark ale or whatever they call those things. Which are delicious. But yeah, there is a hop present. I don't know that I'm getting any kind of, citrusy or, traditional, sort of American hop presence. Of course, these have been around a while. I don't know if you remember when you bottled these, but I've had these a while.
I think I brewed this, it was almost 3 months ago. So I bottled it maybe 25 days after brewing, after carbonating and all of that. So yeah, it's been a while. It's been over 2 months since I bottled.
And even though these have been in the fridge, hop presence is going to fade. You're tasting again, and you're shaking your head. Your confidence is.
My confidence is waning. The thing that I thought I knew for certain, now all of a sudden I don't. There's a roasty maltiness that I picked out. We haven't named the beers yet, have we? Did I miss anything? But the one that I thought was, well, actually somebody came to the door while we were talking. I thought maybe I missed out. But all of a sudden I'm really struggling to tell the difference between these again.
So what is the experiment, Joe?
So I decided to do 2 separate yeast strains on this batch. And in one I used a Scottish ale yeast, and they were both white labs. So I used the Scottish ale yeast, and then in the other I used a German Kolsch yeast. And actually the Scottish yeast attenuated out less by about 2 to 3 points. It came down to 1.012 on the Scottish, and then 1.009 on the Kolsch. Wow. And so there was an ABV discrepancy of like a half a point or so, close to it.
Does that give you a hint, Steve?
No, not anymore. I mean, you'd think it would, but it actually, I was much more confident when the beers were colder.
Yeah.
And now that they've warmed, I'm much less confident of the one that I think is different. What about you?
I did have a guess, and I'm not sure. This is and it was my idea to do the stupid triangle test, Steve. I'm sorry. So our taste buds are being challenged again. It's tough. It's very, very close. And you traditionally, Joe, don't do triangle tests. You just compare the samples side by side.
Pretty much. My folks that I share with, they get 3 of one and 3 of the other, and then I just bug them to death until they give me good feedback. And so that's pretty much it. Yeah, I haven't done too many triangle tests, but that's a good thing to do.
Yeah, it really challenges your, it erases your preconceptions and it takes it back, down to the level where it's all your taste buds. So my samples are almost all gone. Steve's still got some samples left. Are you ready to hazard a guess of which one is the odd one out?
Sure. I'd have to go
Should we do rock, paper, scissors to see who goes first? Ready? 1, 2. Oh, you showed your hand. Well, all right. 1, 2, 3. Oh. Nope. 1, 2, 3. All right. I win. Does that mean I get to have you go first?
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to say, at the moment, that sample A is the odd one out because B and C have a little bit more toasty roastiness to them in my mind. Having said that, when these were colder, I thought it was B. So I'm not really sure, but at the moment, A tastes ever so slightly different to me than B and C.
When they were colder, I was going to say B as well. That was going to be my guess.
That's interesting.
And because I didn't, the A and C seemed sharper to me. Even though we were joking with Joe, do a blind thing, and we'll walk out of the room. But boy, B sure is a nice one to have as the
Right.
So it's the gamesmanship. Did he actually put it in B because we said to put it in B, and then he wouldn't?
Poker face.
First, you never start a land war in Asia.
What's the Princess Bride scene? Where, you put it to the point. It's inconceivable.
It's inconceivable.
So I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to stick with B because I thought at that time A and C were roastier. So
yeah, I did too, but now I think it's A.
Okay.
So,
Joe?
Well, Steve, you should have gone with your gut.
oh,
It's B. I threw you a curveball after our little powwow before we started. Yeah.
well, I actually don't feel too bad because when it was cold, I mean the first sip I thought B is it.
But there might be something to that as well. I mean, as these beers warm up, those aromatics might really come out and kind of cover up some of the other, because this is really aromatic, both because of the grain bill and the toasting of those oats right beforehand. And so maybe as they warmed up, it just sort of, homogenized a little bit, and after several sips of some strong beer, you starts to muddy the brain.
So in your memory, when you first bottled it or when you first brewed it, were the differences between the two substantial?
Yes, they were, and my wife she gets the privilege of tasting directly out of the fermenter. We love that part where we first do the first draw, and we're always blown away by how different they are, and maybe the hop presence maybe has muted over time a little bit, like we mentioned earlier, and they've kind of they've become more similar over time, but yeah, right out the gate we could really tell a huge difference between the two, and the numbers show the difference too as far as how they attenuate it out.
So we still don't know which is which, though.
That's right. And I was going to say, so I'm on board with B. So when I first tasted B, I thought it had a roastier, grainier, rounder flavor.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't as sharp. So I'm going to go with B as being the Scottish ale yeast.
That would be my assumption as well.
You guys got it.
Ah,
That's it.
well.
Yeah.
Yay!
But at this point in time, they were so darn close. They both made a delicious beer. Both the Kolsch yeast and the Scottish ale yeast both made very tasty, sort of American brown ale. We can agree on that. Yeah. But it's not as dramatic as one would, or as I might think if you were to tell me that you were going to do the two, and especially if you were going to tell me that there was, that, although in the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge amount of difference between the finishing gravities. But, so very, very similar beers, but both very tasty.
Mm-hmm.
So, anything else to be said about that experiment?
I love brown ales. I think that, and I said this in the little info card that I share with these folks, brown ale is very unassuming in name. It sounds very plain and boring, but I think that's a nice medium for some creativity. And I tried to throw a whole bunch of things in the pot this time, as far as 8 ounces of this and 8 ounces of that, and then tried this late hopping addition of the Citra. And I'll probably will brew this one again, just like it, but tweak a few things. Maybe swap out for a more fragrant hop to try this late hop edition. Maybe something from New Zealand or the like. I'm not sure, but yeah.
Now for something completely different. We've paused and we've cleared the table and we've poured new samples. And it's easy to see why we don't want to do a triangle test on these. What do we got, Joe?
So this is a Gose, and I used the same yeast strain for both of the beers. And in one of the fermenters, about 3 days into active fermentation, I added roughly, I don't know, it was maybe about 4 pounds of cherries to a 5-gallon batch. So it was a hefty amount, and just let it let it ride until I pulled it into kegs. So
Okay, well, before we get ahead of ourselves, talk about the recipe, the base recipe.
sure. So I wanted to keep it really, really simple. Most Gose recipes that I found just had a very simple grain bill. So I used as my base malt, I used Pilsner, and then wheat, of course. And so I tried to skew the balance to about a 60-40% balance wheat to malt. And so I had 8 pounds of red wheat, and I guess it's not quite 60-40. 8 pounds of red wheat, 7 pounds of Pilsner malt, 1 pound of Victory, and then 3 pounds of acidulated malt.
And the acidulated malt was for?
Was for the tartness. So, there are a number of ways to get tartness in beer. You can do it naturally through, various bacteria like Lactobacillus and Pediococcus, and then even Brettanomyces. It's those organisms that eat all the sugar that Saccharomyces can't. And so that's the real way to do it. I kind of took the cheater's approach and just doctored up the grain bill. You can also add food-grade lactic acid at bottling, doing it that way. But yeah, this acid malt is just plain old malt, and it's, as far as I know, and it's just sprayed with lactic acid.
Now, do you have a pH meter, or did you take a pH reading?
I don't. That's kind of one of the next frontiers is doing a lot of pH monitoring, but I don't do any right now. The way I got around the acidification of the mash, because when all of those sugars are being converted and those starches are being broken down, when you're mashing, you do a full hour mash, and then I drained and I sparged and did all that, and then I added my acid malt back on, and I let it sit for another 30 to 40 minutes in the mash tun with fresh hot water at normal mashing temp. So.
And you for your club, you have a little packet here of acidulated malt that you handed out to people to taste.
Right.
And I guess I don't guess I've ever just eaten acidulated malt out of the tun or out of the tub, but it's a lot more tart than I expected.
It's like a Sour Patch Kid.
And it apparently has an effect on my tongue for some reason. I can't talk. It can't be that brown ale. But did you notice what yeast did you use, and did you notice any effect that the lowered pH, the tartness had on the fermentation?
Not any sign. Fermentation really just went totally normal. It picked up after about 24 hours, and it bubbled like mad for about a day and a half, and then kind of petered out after 5 or 6 days. So I didn't notice anything odd with fermentation. But as far as yeast strain, I used the same yeast on this batch, and it was basically what I found in the clearance bin in Steve's shop. So it was Dusseldorf alt yeast, so alt beer yeast is what I used in this one, and it was just because I needed some yeast. So.
Steve's discount yeast bin.
Well, I do have there is a page on the store website that's like sale yeast, and it's good. And I put the best by date on it. It's like you can take a chance.
But if you make a starter,
no, it's fine,
everything's going to be fine.
I wouldn't sell anything that I wouldn't have confidence in myself.
He's got those fan driven wavy guys out front. Steve's discount yeast.
That's right.
That should be your new business model. I would be your only customer.
We're selling these sales. Come on in.
I want a $500 dent. All right.
So we didn't talk about hopping.
Hopping was really, really simple. I wanted next to no hop presence at all. And in this one, I used Fuggle on this one. I just did an ounce of Fuggle right at the boil, and that was it. So super simple on hopping. I wanted next to no hop presence at all, just to balance out the maltiness.
I've never used acidulated malt. And on my tart beers that I've done either sour mashing or kettle souring or sour wording or using lactobacillus before fermentation, before the boil actually, in order to get that tartness. This is nice. It's not the most tart beer that I've ever had in my life, but it's got a nice tartness to it. What do you think about the base beer, Steve?
It's delicious, and the saltiness reminds me a lot of when I was little, and my dad would put salt in his beer, and he'd sprinkle it on and say, "Dad, what are you doing?" I said, "I put a little salt in my beer." It reminds me of that.
I should mention what contributes to the tartness as well. Many recipes call for the additions of coriander and lemon and things like that. So I zested up a bunch of lemons and I added that right at flame out, and so that contributed some tartness too. It was probably about 5 whole lemons that I zested up, a big bowl full, and just threw it in right at flame out. And then also I toasted coriander seeds right before flame out and crushed those up and threw that in as well. And so,
is there salt in there?
Yes, there is. There's 1.5 ounces of salt, and it's that Himalayan pink salt. I just kind of splurged on the nice stuff. Wow. That stuff, now that I've gone back and tasted some more salts kind of side by side, that Himalayan salt is very salty. It just has more of a saltiness to it. It's strange. And so, I think the balance of salty sour kind of is way more saline and salty than I would have liked, but it's not too much, I don't think.
No, it's not off-putting at all.
I was going to say, when we were in Washington, I believe, so Philadelphia Homebrew Con, but we were in Washington, we went to a brewery, which escapes me now, except for he was serving a Gose, and I recall that his commercial version was quite a bit more salty than this.
Really?
At least that's my memory of it. And so I don't find this to be too saline at all.
No.
I know that there's a number of, Gose is getting a little more popular nowadays, and there's a number of commercial varieties that we can buy here in Arkansas, and most of the ones we can buy are very tart. They are extremely tart, and I like tart beers. I love sour beers, but I wanted to keep it restrained for people kind of new to the sour beer scene, and that's why I wanted the lemon to do a little more of the talking when it comes to sour.
This is very drinkable. And the adjective that came to my mind when I first took a sip of this beer was perfumey. And now I know that it's the lemon and it's probably the coriander as well that's coming through. Pretty strong. It's not, again, it's well balanced, but I smelled it and I was like, oh wow, I was wondering, is that hops that's coming through? But it was very perfumey, and I guess it's the lemon zest and the coriander, and it adds another. It's not just a salty beer. It's not that salty to me, but it adds a layer of complexity on top of that makes it kind of a pretty beer. I don't know, but that came to my mind. It's very drinkable. And I don't know what the ABV is, but it seems to be sessionable, but at the same time it's kind of refreshing, and so somewhere in the 5% range.
Right, and there is actually a difference between the two, in as far as attenuation goes. Again, the one that I added cherries to, I think it actually helped dry it out a little more, and it did come down just a smidge. It attenuated out more, and that was kind of nice to see. That's what I was hoping to happen, that I'd feed that yeast a little more with that really fermentable sucrose, and just let it rip, and it worked.
So how did you add the cherries? How did you treat the cherries, and how did you add them?
So I learned a lesson last time I used cherries, and I guess I should give a little precursor to this. My parents live in Montana, and I went to see my dad this last summer, and we made a day of picking cherries on a cherry U-pick farm. It's climate it's northwest Montana, much like the Washington area and all of that. So it's very wet and mild and temperate. So those cherries do wonderfully. We picked one tree clean and got just about 76 pounds of cherries. And I loaded up 2 full suitcases of cherries, and we spent all day pitting them on the back porch and drinking beer. Was fun. But anyway, so I've got about 60 pounds of pitted cherries that are frozen, and I've been trying to use them in various ways. And the last time I used cherries in a beer, I wanted to make sure, I was worried about sanitation, and so I boiled them, and for just a few minutes, and then dumped them into a stainless little mesh strainer, dropped it in the fermenter, and this was after active fermentation was done, and it turned out not good at all. It just tasted like there was a bunch of fruity pulp in there. It just tasted weird. It didn't taste like cherries at all. And so I was really surprised and read a little bit more. And a simple trick to do when using fruit, I cooked them sous vide. So I put them in a plastic bag and boiled it for a couple of minutes, and none of those aromatics went away. And I think that the cherry flavor came through a lot better preparing them that way, where I'm not boiling, in an open pot, sealed up and boiled them, and it got at that hot temperature. I let them cool down for a couple of hours and then put them right into the fermenter.
So you actually sealed them, vacuum sealed them, or sealed them in a bag, and then boiled that bag.
Right.
You could take it. You could take this sous vide theory a step beyond that, and you could even bring it up to say 160 degrees Fahrenheit or 170 degrees Fahrenheit, and leave that in there for 15, 20 minutes, and just pasteurize them there. That way, you wouldn't have to boil them. But this seems to have worked. Whatever you did.
Yeah, and I think if they're sealed up, a lot of those aromatics and flavors don't drive off in a boil. And so whether it's pasteurized or boiled, I'm curious, though. I didn't think about just pasteurizing. I may try that next time and see if it punches it up some more.
So did you just dump them in the fermenter, or did you put a bag around them? Or
I said I dumped them straight in the fermenter. It went in these same stainless, they're like little mesh, stainless mesh kind of cylinders, yeah. And so I just filled that guy up, and about 3.5 pounds, maybe 4 pounds it was when it was all said and done, and I stuffed it in that sleeve. I really stuffed it in there and just dropped the thing, and it set in the fermenter for about 2 weeks, and then I racked off into kegs and just left the cherries behind.
What do you think, Steve?
Really nice beers. I personally prefer the non-cherried beer. I just really like it. It's gone. Not that I don't like the cherry one, but the non-cherried one just really kind of blew me away. I really like that a lot.
Yeah, the cherry one, it's not like a Luden's cough drop cherry flavor. It's not artificial at all. It's kind of a deep, sort of rich, almost a dark cherry flavor, in my opinion, where it's not like a candy cherry. Right. It's a kind of a more mature kind of cherry flavor, and I don't know if and the perfuminess, it seems to mute the lemony character, at least in my opinion.
I think that's the case as well. There's a lot going on when you start adding fruit and things to beers, and it can kind of muddle some of the other qualities, I think.
But it's good. And I'm not sure. I'm going to sample a little more to see which one I like better. They're both good, and they're both drinkable. I think the plain one may be more drinkable to me in that I would drink it more of in a hurry, because it's more of kind of a simpler flavor, whereas I want to savor the cherry one a little more. It's like, I want to slow down and drink and say, that's more to think about. That's more to taste.
Yeah, ditto. I mean, I completely agree. And with the non-cherried one, work with me here. It reminds me of potato chips. Huh. It's like if I were to eat some potato chips and drink a beer at the same time, it's that salty. And I think it's because of the Victory malt, and it's kind of a biscuity beer. It's kind of like I'm eating chips and drinking a beer in a way.
So maybe those vinegar potato chips.
Yeah, the sea salt and vinegar. Yeah, it reminds me of that. Yeah.
Sea salt and vinegar potato chips it'd be overload. You wouldn't want those with it. You'd want something on the opposite side of the scale. These are both very tasty.
Yeah.
And again, I'm impressed with the tartness that you get just from the acidulated malt. I'd be curious to see what the pH is. I would get it, my tart beers tend to be around, what are they, around 3.2 or something like that. I don't think it's down that far.
Yeah. That's pretty far down. That 3.2. Yeah. I would assume that these are probably closer to 4, maybe. I mean, it's pretty mild on the tartness. I think if I ever brewed this again, I would definitely punch up the acidulated malt. And I don't know how much that contributes to fermentability. Do you know, Steve?
No, I don't have a whole lot of experience with it. I do use it from time to time, but kind of just because the traditional recipe calls for a pound or two. I know that you don't want to get too much because of the acid problem. So if you get too much of your grain,
the yeast is not going to be happy if it's too acidic.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But as far as the fermentability of the grain itself, I don't have a clue.
Yeah, that and I need to read more about that. This sour beer world is really like it just feels like a really new frontier, and there's so much going on in it, and this is a great gateway beer, I think, into sour beer world. Mm-hmm. I think that the saltiness really cuts into that tart edge on a beer and makes it much more sessionable and approachable to the layman.
Yeah. And with the acidulated malt, it's easier to brew. You don't have to worry about dosing, lactobacillus either before or anywhere during the process. But
it does. I mean, no matter how you slice it, though, this is going to be a longer and more involved brew. Using acidulated malt is an easy way to make a Gose, but it does add a whole extra hour or more because you're kind of forced to sparge if you do no sparge or fly sparging. You'd have to work around that on those first runnings, and then add your acid malt and wait around another hour and do it again. So you're kind of forced into that way of brewing by using this acid malt.
I just tasted the plain one again, and boy, the perfumey aspect really punches
as
on
they
that.
warm up.
And the difference between the two, that lemony character and maybe a little bit of that, the coriander as well, really comes through on the plain one, whereas on the cherry one, I'm not getting that much at all. No, on the nose, it's not there at all, which is interesting. I don't know if that's because there was another fermentation, when you put the fruit in there, or if it's just the fruit compounds kind of dragging that stuff out or whatever. But, both are tasty and fun.
Yeah, and because it's a salty beer, I keep wanting to drink more. I'm thirsty.
It makes you thirsty.
Yeah.
It's a sneaky trick, It's a sneaky trick.
It's like free popcorn and peanuts at the bar.
That's right.
Well, Joe, this is a lot of fun. You did it again. You came up with a couple of interesting experiments, and I certainly appreciate your keeping us in the loop.
Of course, yeah. I'm happy to share beer, and beer is best when shared. So that's the way to do it.
Well, we'll help you do that. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Well, thanks again to Joe and Steve. All 4 of those beers were delicious. Experiments are fun, especially when you have tasty beer at the end of them. And I look forward to hearing and possibly tasting what Joe does next. I appreciate Joe including Steve and me in the loop on those experiments. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to James at basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form at basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Thanks to everybody supporting us through our Patreon page. Special goodies coming your way. Check that out at patreon.com/basicbrewing. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering, and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site. You can get a free Basic Brewing bottle opener with any DVD combo, and you can check out our free Basic Brewing shirts in the store, too. You can find our logbooks where you can track and log up to 50 batches of beer. Check all that out at basicbrewingshop.com, and you can get free stickers with every order. And don't forget, you're going to join the American Homebrewers Association and subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through the associate links on basicbrewing.com. That's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.